Now, let's turn our attention to another story here. It was the world that became fixed on a bleak corner of the North Atlantic last June, when an alarm was raised that a submersive carrying 5 passengers had lost contact in the inky depths of the waters. At that time, we spoke.
Rescue systems are geared to rescue off submarines. So you send down a rescue submersible that goes to a submarine, the hatches into lock, which then allows people to exit. In this particular case, the hatch is locked shut from the outside, and you can't conduct that form of transfer. So you have to bring it up to the surface. And 4,000 meters, bringing up a stricken submersible has never ever been done before.
Now, that's the voice of Ryan Ramsey, former submarine captain, who we spoke to just a year ago. Let's get the latest on this and a bit of an update as to where we might be. Former submarine captain Ryan Ramsey is back with us today. Ryan, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. This was a year ago when we had that conversation. Of course, everybody for a while was hoping that, that contact would be, the lack of contact would be short-lived, and eventually they would be able to re-engage with the submersive and, be able to make some level of contact. That wasn't to be, and tragedy struck, and this really was a horrendous way for a vessel and 5 people to lose their lives.
Yes, it really was an absolute tragedy that could have been avoided. I think in reality, the analysis that's been conducted since shows that had decent procedures been followed, had rigor been applied to the Titan submersible itself, that this could have been totally avoided.
What is the latest, as you're aware so far, Ryan? Because there does seem to have been almost, and perhaps in marine and the marine and nautical world, it's very different, but there does seem to be almost a lack of any information as to what the specifics are of what really happened on that day.
That is correct. There has been stuff going on. So I know there's been investigations carried out by the Coast Guard and a variety of other entities as to firstly what happened on the fateful day itself, and then it's starting to go a bit further back into maintenance regimes, the culture that was within that organisation, and anything that can be learned from those lessons going forward. In particular, the potential to regulate that particular sector a bit more than was done in the past.
Yeah, I was going to say that was perhaps, I think I've got this right, but part of the criticism was that this was I don't want to use the word casual in an uninformed way, but it did seem that it was very kind of ad hoc, that, you put a vessel together and down you go.
Yeah, well, I think you're right to say that it's slightly casual. I think there's almost 2 ends to that spectrum. So you had one end that was very rigorous, peer-reviewed, used other organisations in order to check that the submersibles were going to operate effectively. And you can use the one used by Cameron before he filmed Titanic. He'd really thought about how that should be applied. And then the other end of the spectrum, where you've got the Titan submersible and nobody's checking anything, and despite the fact people are saying they don't quite agree with this and something might be wrong, no action's taken.
What do you think when we hear tragedies such as this, the phrase lessons have been learned? Have lessons been learned, other than, perhaps people themselves thinking twice about doing it?
Well, it's really interesting, that term lessons learned, because in reality, I think it should be called lessons identified, because you can identify the lessons, but it takes whoever reads those lessons to actually learn them and incorporate them into what they do going forward. Yeah. I know that there's a billionaire currently looking to take a submersible back down to the Titanic.
Yes.
And I note also that has been peer reviewed and has undergone huge amounts of scrutiny, testing and everything else before it goes down. So maybe that does show a path forward. The overall question though is, why do we go down to the Titanic? Because it's no longer exploration. We know what we need to know about the Titanic, and actually maybe they should, the people it should be treated like a grave at sea and just be left alone there.
Yeah, and that seems to be a fairly common line from people who know the sea well. That, enough of this, really. People have gone down there. There are images, and yes, they are spectacular. They are haunting for obvious reasons, but, we know where it is. We know the state it's in. what more is there to be gained by continuing voyages down there, other than the vanity of those that have got the money to put these kind of expeditions together?
Yes, I totally agree with you. I mean, if you think about how much money a billionaire has, it's huge amounts, and they could
Yeah.
do so much more. There's a point you can buy everything, big mansions, everything else, but I mean, there's much better philanthropy to do than going down and using your money to explore things like this just to push the limits. It's no longer pushing the limits of what people can do, because we know it's already been done.
Yeah.
So I think there are other things they could do.
Indeed. Relatives of those that died that day are still searching for answers, of course. And I'd imagine those answers are right across the spectrum as to how those in charge of this doomed and fatal voyage were, even allowed to operate in this kind of way. There will be that. But perhaps they're looking for maybe more technical answers. Is there anything beyond the obvious that, if you go to those kind of depths in a certain kind of craft that really can't withstand it, and let's be honest, lots of people looked at that and said it was extraordinary that anybody ever thought it could withstand those kind of depths and that kind of experience. Beyond that, what is there more to know, really?
Well, I think the families would want to know the exact moments and how, and in our view, I mean, we've run simulations on this to work out how quick the actual implosion and then the implosion was, and it was microseconds. I mean, they couldn't have known it was going to happen. They might have known that something was out of control, but the actual final event they wouldn't have known anything about. And I think that will give solace to the families for one part of it. But I think also the families will be really struggling possibly with guilt. Why didn't they try harder to stop? All these things families will have to deal with, and anything that we can give them, or the authorities can give them to enable that closure, they should do that. And like I said, I haven't seen the released reports yet, but I would hope they release them relatively soon.
And do you think there is any hope of this idea that you just mentioned, that this is an area that should now be left alone? I sense there is a growing feeling around that. Is there? I guess $1 million speaks 1,000 words and all the rest of it. Maybe that usurps any health and safety or moral or ethical concerns. But there appears to be a growing body of thought that we're done now with this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we do it in other places. So if you take HMS Hood, for example, that's a war grave, and you can't go diving on that. And so I think it has been done. I think that the next campaign to go see the Titanic won't be viewed as a positive or an engineering feat. It will be viewed as something that should be avoided, and gradually that will taper off, and people will just leave her alone.
And when you look at the vessel, if that is the correct terminology, the submersible that they went down on this trip in, did it, to the trained eye like yourself, just looking at it before it went and the images that we've seen subsequently of before it took that fatal voyage, does it look like something that wouldn't have worked to you?
Well, I think there's two elements. For me personally, I looked at it and went, okay, there's no rigor attached to that. The control surfaces don't work. Why would you put two dissimilar materials together in that way? How do you know? How do you know after each trip what damage or stress has been caused at those depths? You're talking 400 bar of pressure every time you go down there, and if you think a tire is only 2 bar, it's significant. So it's always going to get worse each time you go down. I would never have gone on board that out to sea. And if I had been part of that company, I would be advising continuously Stockton Rush to stop that program. It doesn't work. Even
to lesser depths than it went, it would still be to you a compromised mode of
absolutely.
transport. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think the reality is it imploded at around 1,700 meters, so less than halfway down. So that also tells you that it wasn't ready to go for that. Indeed. But hopefully they learn the lessons going forward. or use the lessons going forward.
Indeed. Ryan, thank you for your time, sir. It's a grim reminder that it was a year ago today. That's former submarine captain Ryan Ramsey on what happened last June when that alarm was raised. 5 people losing their lives after it lost contact. And I hadn't really realised until he just said it then that it only got about halfway to where it was due to go. This was clearly a piece of equipment that was not to the correct standards to withstand the precarious journey that it was set to undertake. But you know, these things, I mentioned the word vanity to Ryan there. It happens with space search. You know, how many billionaires can you get in a rocket these days? They're all vying for a bit of a go in the intergalactic department, and similarly with the seas. If you've got the money, what a great vanity project. I'm going to go and see the Titanic. Only 7 people ever have seen the Titanic since they discovered where it lay to rest. And I think his overarching point is that this is now a war grave, right? I mean, essentially, it is a grave of those that lost their lives. That can't be forgotten. It should probably be left there.